Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm thrilled to have with me today fellow ABA Law Student Division leadership alum, Dr. Michelle Bodden-White. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Matthew. It's good to see you, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to have you. Now, we've been on some conference calls over the years because of our mutual involvement in the ABA, but just in case my listeners haven't come across you yet, go ahead and give yourself a little introduction.
Well, I am a relatively new attorney. It's been just a couple of years since I've been in law school. And before going to law school, I was a teacher and a principal for maybe about 28 years or so. But I always wanted to go to law school. I had my reasons for that. So I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to kind of jump into this second career. And I'm delighted to be here.
And you know, they've seen in the title and they've heard me say doctor. So that's PhD doctor, just to clarify.
It is doctor. I do have a doctorate in educational leadership, which I achieved before going to law school. So yes, I am a doctor.
Yes. And so given that background, you said you always wanted to go into law. In light of sort of all the craziness around, you know, the legal system and a lot of law students having to take on all this student debt, with the cost benefit analysis being for a lot of younger people, maybe their first career pursuing law, they're looking at it and saying the cost benefit analysis says no. Why still? Well, you know, you must really be passionate about it, but what is your why ultimately that you wanted to go into it?
Yep. My why really had nothing to do with money or where law is now. That's sort of what I'm facing now. But when I was a little girl, I grew up in Queens, New York, and they were doing busing for integration. So I got bused to a white neighborhood, and I had a teacher who just did not believe that I was capable of succeeding in her class. So whenever she gave us a test, a spelling test, a math test, or whatever, she always made me sit on the floor under my desk to take the test to ensure that I wasn't cheating. And I did very well in school, and that was fine. But I told myself at that point that I was going to be a teacher because children shouldn't learn like that. Mm-hmm. And I was going to be a lawyer because lawyers are the people in society that make things fair, that fight for things to be fair. And so that was my guiding light, like my whole life. And so I had my whole educational career, which was wonderful. And then it was time for my law career, which is also starting out as being one. So that's how I got here.
Right. And then it should come as no surprise, given your background, that your position in the law student division was being I forget the terminology because it changed after I was a member, but you were on the council also for the ABA section of legal education and admissions to the bar, right?
Absolutely.
And so it sounds like your driving mission aligns right with that, although for legal education as well.
It really was. I was very, very honored to be able to be on the council for the year that I was on there. I have to say, you know, I found law school very challenging. I'm sure most law students do at some point or another. But what struck me about it was that the Socratic method and some of the way that things were taught were so different than what is the model in education programs for K-12 or for undergraduate. And so I think I spent my first semester just in shock at the the teaching methods. And then I had to, remind myself it's a different profession. There's different approaches and there are reasons for those approaches. But yeah, 1L year was eye-opening. It was also the spring of 1L year was when COVID hit. Mm-hmm. So after spring break, I was home for about a year and a half. And that too was a really interesting experience in terms of learning and shifting that quickly. So yeah, it was quite an experience, law school.
And in particular, given your background and an education, that you could see, especially serving on the council, that these educators, which they are for lawyers,
Right.
are not they're not trained educators, most of them.
Absolutely correct. And that was, I really had to kind of fight with myself and understand that they are experts in law and it's a different way of teaching. And I just had to kind of adjust to that because they're very different methods. I mean, when I was a principal, if I had had a teacher who said, the students are going to be working on this for 12 weeks, and then I'm giving a test at the end of the 12 weeks, and that's it, and that's their grade, I would have been mortified. I would never just know. But that's normal in law school. So, it was an adjustment.
And I'm curious, especially for you, for your perspective on, especially in light of why we're having you on the podcast today, as it relates to law school not teaching you anything practical about going and being a practicing attorney. In particular, their failure to prepare law students to go be solo practitioners because they're not incentivized in the rankings to pump out a bunch of solo practitioners. They want their students to get prestigious jobs so that they could rise in the rankings. So, what's your perspective on all of that?
Yeah, I think that's really unfortunate because there's a lot of creativity and a lot that can be done as a solo attorney. And you come out of law school with the understanding of how to use the law. Nobody comes out of law school knowing all the law. I mean, that would be crazy. But you do know how to approach a problem. You do know how to really kind of scaffold and create a solution that would work for clients. So one would, you know, and you're not limited if you go solo because like this with the subscription method, there are lots of different ways to approach it. I think it's unfortunate that the rankings, emphasize employment after law school as one of the key metrics because it does push law schools towards we're going to teach students to get these jobs. We're going to do, all of these fairs. We're going to do all of this. That's a tremendous amount of assistance with career development. And none of it is really geared. I shouldn't say none of it. There are a few law schools here and there, but the majority don't gear it towards opening your own practice and what you need to be able to do to open your own practice. And I think that's unfortunate, particularly when you think about the access to justice question. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have a large number of solo attorneys who can approach law differently because it would enable more people to be able to access the legal system in ways that are really productive for them instead of kind of pushing, big law, or government or whatever. And not that those aren't necessary, but they're not the most accessible. And so, it's just, I don't know. I understand why the ABA is very focused on people getting jobs because, law school is expensive and people want to have jobs afterwards. But I do wish there were a way to also incentivize starting your own firm.
Yeah. I mean, you said it great, and you read my mind on the access to justice part because that was my next question. And the law schools, they talk a big game. We care about
Sure.
access to justice. The ABA talks a big game. We care about access to justice, and let's just do pro bono because that's worked over the last several decades, right? Well, for some people,
Yeah.
but we still have a huge, huge problem. And like you've pointed out, more solos means more people getting their services met, but billing time prevents them from being able to scale. And it's like if you're not working, then you're not making any money. And if you're not working, you're not providing service. But in today's world, you don't have to do it that way. So then why are you starting Learning and Legacies Law PLLC?
Right.
And so you're not planning to want to bill your time when you launch, right?
Right. Absolutely not. It's really interesting. I mean, when I finished law school, I spent a year as a law clerk, which I loved. I mean, I loved clerking in the court, but law clerk does not pay well, right? And then I worked for a brief time in government, and I very much enjoyed the work. But the workload can get a little bit intense,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a stage of my life issue. To get up and go someplace at 9 in the morning every day is just not my goal. To spend just the 9 to 5 or 6 or whatever time it was not the best way for me to function. And also, as a solo, you have more control over what types of law and what kinds of cases that you want to take and what you're going to work with. And in government and other forms, you get what you're assigned. So I realized pretty quickly that that was not going to be my path. and this is definitely much more my path because I can really kind of design my firm in a way that works for me. And
Mhm.
that's I think, much more productive. You read about the levels of stress and the suicide rates among attorneys and the addiction rates and all of those things. And the job itself is stressful. Being a lawyer is stressful in itself, but certainly being a lawyer in a format or a condition that you don't necessarily think is the best just adds to that weight on your head and shoulders. And so I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as I could tell from your work history, it doesn't look like you've ever actually had to bill your time, right? Because at least with law clerk and then government attorney,
Right.
prior to that, principal and teacher, and you're not billing your time when you're doing those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll tell you, one semester during law school, I was interning in a big law firm. And so then as an intern, I had to kind of keep track of my time. And it drove me crazy. The 6 minute increments drove me crazy. I can't even begin to tell you. And this was during the time when things were pretty much remote, but offices were opening back up. So I recall going to the office of this firm maybe twice during the semester, and they were showing me around, and they showed me a space where they had showers. And I was like, "Well, why do you have showers?" Well, sometimes people work really late, and I'm thinking to myself, if you have to be here long enough through the day that you're gonna, like, go to sleep somewhere and shower and still be at work, this is not the place for
Hmm.
Michelle. Michelle Kim, it's not gonna happen. But it was astonishing, and they were very open about it, like, and I just it was too much, Matthew, let me just put it that way. That was my one big law experience, and that was enough.
Yeah, and think about this problem that we have in the profession for big law in particular of lack of women, lack of other attorneys of color,
Mhm,
men or women that are in these big law firms in leadership roles in particular. And this is mostly a video only podcast, so people can't see that you're a woman of color, and it's so. And I don't like to give any sort of perspective on this because I don't have it. I'm a white man, but this is a problem. And most of my guests on the show have been women attorneys, attorneys of color,
mhm.
and it is you who are paving the path and being brave enough to say this is not for me. Well, first of all, it's not designed for that, and you just gave your perspective on that, and I also think it applies to white men and anyone who sees that and says, no, absolutely not. This is not for me. But provide then your perspective on how that and what that's doing to the profession and preventing people who are like you from pursuing that career path.
I think it's making it a lot more difficult because that's not first of all, it's funny, I just read an article about this. The whole idea of what it is to be professional is sort of based on white men, right? I mean, these were the lawyers, and the bar exam was designed to exclude people. So there's sort of a way you're supposed to look, a way you're supposed to carry yourself, a way you're supposed to manage your time, a way you're supposed to do everything that was never designed for women, for people of color. Those were not the groups that it was intended for. And in fact, in some ways, it was designed to keep those groups out, right? So the model of big law and the time increments and what it takes to go from being an associate to becoming a partner to becoming, whatever else is intended for sort of a narrow group. And for people who aren't already in that group, getting into that group becomes much more difficult. And the stress that that puts on the person, I think, is a lot more intense. You go into rooms. I mean, this is 2024, and in the last couple of years, I've certainly gone into rooms and conferences where I'm the only. It shouldn't still be the only at this point in our history, but that happens because it's it's such a mental strain sometimes that you just say, "Oh, never mind. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to pursue it." And people will leave positions and kind of, go out of it. And the profession is weaker for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And in particular, I think the billable hour has such a negative effect for women attorneys because our culture, our American culture is the woman must do the things at home and the woman must take care of the kids and think about the family and plan the schedule and do all these things. I mean, and in my own household, like I do most of the cooking because I'm trying to counter that, right? But like and I have the podcast,
Good
you
for
know,
you.
try to, you know, to highlight women like you that shows that, you know, you don't want to live that life of billing time, but that billable hour, fairly or unfairly, and I think we could say unfairly on this show, that our culture puts those burdens on women. But if culture shifts are hard. But if billing time was, say, prohibited ethically, and you
Right.
had to do another billable model, I feel like that would lower the barriers for at least women attorneys to find more success in those big law firm environments. But then if you're already doing that, why not be in control of your own destiny as well, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the billable hour is really a difficult model for everybody, but certainly for women, because again, if you have young children, or even if you don't, the expectation is that you're the one who's both taking care of home and taking care of work. And it shifted some over time, but that still seems to be sort of where we are and what we put forth. So that's a lot for anybody to keep up with. And then when your time is not your own because you have to meet a target of the number of hours, whatever that is, then it makes it all the more difficult. I think we have to kind of move away from thinking that time should be the measurement, that the quality of what someone does has to do with how long it takes them to do it. I mean, the person who my accountant, I'm never going to ask them, how many hours did it take you to put this together? I just want it together, and I want to go through my numbers and make sure that the things are right. How long it took them really doesn't make any difference to me. The quality of what they've done is what matters. And I think the same is true of law. So, the billable hour just sort of sets up the wrong paradigm for what is valuable. And it makes it harder for women, certainly, but I think it does make it hard for everybody.
So let's talk about learning in legacies law, which is a great little alliteration too. And I love the trade name, right? You're not your name has nothing to do with what your
Right.
brand is telling people you do, which is great, first of all. So I mean, why then let's ask the obvious question there, which is why? Why not put your name in your law firm?
I thought about that, but I think a brand, I think that's a good thing with it being a little separate from yourself, you know, both psychologically for me to say, this is my work, not myself, not my person, right? So I did not want those two to blend. And it doesn't mean my work is any less important, but I do want to have a distinction between who I am and what I do. And so that was a big part of having a brand, a trade name. And learning and legacies is because of the areas of law that I am most interested in. One is, of course, around education, right? And ensuring that children, particularly children with special needs, get the services that they're entitled to, that there is, with their bullying concerns. And right now, there's a very big issue going on with data privacy and schools, because schools act in loco parentis. So they may sign up with, whatever service, whatever software, who has access to the children's information. And there are some real thorny issues in there. So that's kind of the learning part of it. The legacies part of it has to do with estate planning. And I know these are two very diverse areas, but I'm interested in what I'm interested in. And these are the two that I really enjoy. So that the legacy part is to really kind of leave a legacy and figure out before, somebody passes, what's going to happen and what's happening with all of their things. And so learning and legacies law just seemed like the right name.
I think it's great. And of course the three L's, right? There's some fun things you could do around that, right? And there's definitely overlap. And I think in particular this audience that's already open-minded to looking at things in a different way. I mean, when I hear that, I also think about, there are special needs trusts that are set up. And so if you're going to be doing special education related work for that family, why not help them get their estate plan together too, since you've already learned everything about this family to help them with their child in school. Now you can help make sure their estate is taken care of in light of the fact that this child also has special needs for legal estate planning matters as well. So
Right.
I see it as an incredible niche with some synergy. And of course, your background in education, you've been on the administrator side. I'm sure you've had to work with those plans in the past in your previous career, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the what I really like is being able to tie together what I did in the past with law so that I can still be connected with it with education. And I do think I bring a different perspective to it because of my background.
Yeah. And that reminds me something I wanted to say earlier, which was it was law students like you who had a previous career in law school that I learned everything from. So much more than just the doctrinal work of like learning to think like a lawyer. It was let's look at what these people with real world experience and are doing and how they're doing it as a student now. And I just even in personal conversations at bar events with them, like I had so much more to learn. And now when I go to law schools and I try to get to know my audience because I always like to see like who came here right from undergrad, who had a career first. And I say, and it's a little embarrassing. It's usually like early on, and when I go speak to law students in their first year, they're a little embarrassed because they're like, oh, like we. But there's nothing embarrassing about it because everyone has more to learn from you and your life experience, right? And I
Right.
tell them that. I let them know, and it's so true. But I know some lawyers who like were engineers and then they went to law school thinking patent law, of course. And like now they're family law attorneys. And I'm like thinking like, what are you doing? You have such a great background in prior work experience. You got to find a way to like bring that together with what they're currently doing. But no, like they just really fell in love with family law. It's like, whatever. So the fact that you're actually doing it, you're actually combining your past work experience with what you're going to be doing as a solo practitioner, just, major kudos to you for being able to do that. Clearly it's something that you're passionate about. So there's really no questions there, more so just observations, unless you have any thoughts on on all that I just said.
I mean, well, first of all, thank you. And secondly, yeah, I noticed the same thing in law school too, that we're called what the non-traditional students. And there are a good number of non-traditional students who are going back to law school. And I think it's a great thing because I do think you bring a different perspective to the class than students who are coming directly from undergrad to law school. That can enrich the whole discussion and really kind of give some different flavor to some of the work. But also after law school, I think there's a different mindset around what being successful is and where one can be a lawyer. Law schools tend to push big law as like the golden ticket. That's the model one, and they dangle those salaries and all of that. And the truth is, most lawyers are not in big law. So if you come to law school with a different background, then I think you come with a different perspective on what you plan to do with your law degree. You're coming because you don't have to be there. You don't have to be there. I mean, there were days in law school where I thought to myself, I could go home. I don't have to do this. It's something I want to do and I'm passionate about, but I don't, it's not a requirement of me anyway. That might be a different kind of feeling for somebody coming directly from undergrad. So when you're coming back, then you really made a strong decision that this is what you want to do and you do approach it differently. And I think that carries over to when you finish.
So now it's time for the subscription talk of the podcast in more detail, because
Okay.
that is also why my listeners tune in. But this is definitely going to be a great episode for law students, for attorneys who are on the fence about going solo. But now let's get into the subscription fun stuff. So obviously you're on the podcast. I'm going to answer as many subscription questions as I can in the next 30 minutes. But I also want to know, because I think it's important for the other listeners, is like, how did you come to the idea that subscriptions can work for you? And like, where have you gone to try to do research to learn more about it?
Well, what really struck me, I have to say, was you. Because when I was leaving the ABA council, I remember us having a conversation and you were very, very excited about the subscription model. So I looked up your website and I thought to myself, $20 a month? I mean, how accessible is that to people? Because you pay more than that for Netflix. So I was really intrigued and excited about a way to, again, increase access to justice and kind of what you can do. And I, kind of kept up and looked at all the tiers and the different things that you're doing. I read the book Subscribe, and I'm just trying to find out more and more about the model. And I think it's a great approach. I think that there are ways that I can incorporate it into the practice areas that I'm working with. I do have a question though for you. And that's really about your time management because you offer these 15-minute sessions, these 15-minute blocks. And how do you kind of keep up with that to ensure that you have a balance between the time that you're devoting to individual clients who may call in with a question about this and that, as well as all of the other things that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most important question. And frankly, for billable hour attorneys as well, because you got to plan out your day for billable time,
Hmm.
right? Like that's what I did when I was a billable hour attorney. I had a whiteboard right next to my desk. And at the end of every day, I would look at the work I had to do and think, what are 10 billable hours I could get done tomorrow? And I never did, maybe once or twice. And I'd write them on the whiteboard. And as soon as I'd get that work done, I'd cross it out, cross it out. And it was a guesstimate because you don't know how long something's actually going to take you, right? I mean, you get a sense
Right.
of it, but still like not super efficient, right? The whiteboard thing. So what I do being a firm owner, which anybody could do is, and I'm looking for a software solution. I've put this out into the world before, but I'll put it out there again. If there's a software solution that does this, I would happily pay, even as much as $100 a month, no more than that. I'm not willing to really pay anything more than that a month, except for my malpractice insurance. But it is, I have multiple Google Docs. I could
Okay.
probably do a spreadsheet, and that's because I have these two businesses, right? Like Curbisverse LLC is my business that I do the podcast under and some consulting under and some other things, right? So I have two of these docs for this, where it's all the work I need to do as it arrives on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual list of like, here are all the things I need to accomplish in my business. And at the end of every day, I have time blocked 30 minutes, though it doesn't take me that long anymore, but it's from 8:30 to 9. So it's not like if I go shorter, it's totally fine. I'm not booking anything else during that time. I don't let anyone schedule calls with me during that time. Sometimes I do, it depends. But then I look at these lists and I look at my next day, and I don't let anyone book time with me within 24 hours. Really, it's
Mhm.
more, I think it's like 16 or 18 hours, because it's like when I sit down at my computer at 8:30, after I've spent time with the family, we've eaten dinner, we've put the little one down, I know that like at that time, 8:30, there's going to be no calls scheduled for the next day that haven't already been booked. And so then I look at what is the other time available in my calendar in 15-minute, 30-minute, hour-long blocks, approximately. And, I'm not perfect about this. As a true solo, I don't have an accountability partner in my firm that's like saying, hey, you got to make sure you do this, right? But I do my best to reference these lists, and then I have to prioritize. What do I need to get done tomorrow? And for daily or weekly or monthly things, I tend to already have that blocked on my calendar as well. So like every Monday at noon, I look back at my previous week's expenses and I categorize that in the accounting software that I use. So it's categorized every single week. So doing my taxes, tax season, I give everything to my accountant, and it's really easy because everything's categorized. So I have things like that are always scheduled.
Mhm.
But then for things that aren't, like I need to write this demand letter for a client. So like I need at least 30 minutes to do that. And I use AI. Like I put in a bunch of facts and I use AI to draft the first draft, but I
Mhm.
still like to curate and make sure I go through it and that it actually sounds good. And sometimes I might draft the first draft from scratch and put it into AI and say, make this better, make this more succinct, change passive voice to active voice. Like I'm using AI pretty much every day, so that helps speed tasks along. And if I end up not needing that 30-minute block, even better, because then I can move on to the next task sooner, right? And that restricts what I'm working on and what my focus is every day to maybe just these 3 or 4 tasks outside of my scheduled calls that I have. Something else I do is I leverage Calendly, but a lot of software does this. I leverage their automations. And so after every single podcast interview, I have automated a 45-minute block post episode so that I could just do all the post production afterwards.
Oh, okay, good.
And so
Mhm.
I just take care of that post production immediately following the episode. Everything's fresh in my mind anyway. I usually don't need the full 45 minutes, but it automatically blocks it. But I actually have an hour because I also automate in Calendly that nobody could schedule time with me within 15 minutes of the last thing.
Okay.
And so by having certain, and I have like, I counted them recently. I think I have over 40 different types of Calendly links out there because I pay for the upgraded version. And so I have all these different Calendly links for different situations that have different automations on the front and back ends. Sometimes I only let it be 5 minutes before or after certain calls, depending on, that. And as my practice changes and grows, I adjust these. So it's not set it and forget it. It is for a while, but you have to adapt like every so often. Scheduled every 3 months on my calendar is like looking at my systems and making sure like things are working, and to change, think about changing things, right? So really I have like an hour, even though
Hmm.
I block the 45 minutes post call. But I do have some exception Calendly links where, like, if I want to give somebody access to like more of my calendar because we really need to meet, but I don't take random calls for the most part, I will share this one-click link. And I really leverage the one-click links on Calendly so they can't just spam book calls with me. So I will give a one-click link for these 15 minutes where you could slot in right at the end of that 45 minutes. So I always have exceptions to my rules, a lot like the law. And then that's how I manage it. So I everything goes in my calendar. My wife knows if I need Matt's time or it's date night, it's going in the calendar. Like, that is how we're getting it done. Like, we're gonna have the date night here. Like, she puts things on my calendar. I let her. So like, that's like, I live and die by my calendar. All my kids' stuff goes in my calendar. All my networking events go in my calendar, including potential travel time if it's in person, which more and more of them are these days. And even being involved with boards, not so lawyer boards. Like, I'm involved with my Chamber of Commerce. I just joined that board of directors. I'm involved in 2 boards in my local community. And I do these things because I like giving back to my community, but it does generate business for me because people hire you because they know, like, and trust you, right? And so like, putting that time on my calendar and committing to it. Like, if something's on my calendar, I commit to it. Things come up. People know I have a young child, and that's why it's really easy to reschedule with the same technology that I'm using. And even I would prefer somebody use the Calendly rescheduling that's in all my booking links, that's in all the calendars, that's all automated, that's in the calendar event. I would rather they do that 30 seconds before we meet than just not show up. It's still disappointing. Oh, we had this thing booked, but we're rescheduled for a later date. I know it's the soonest it could be is for tomorrow, unless I'm fully booked out for the next day, which happens, but it's rare. And then that frees up. I could just move on to my next task that's on my calendar for the next time slot. So I know that's a really long answer, Michelle, but it requires a long answer because that's how I do it. When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650.com, and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, because organizing time, even, not billable hours kind of time, but organizing your time so that you can get done each day what it is that you set out to do is just so critically important. And one of the things I'm learning as a solo is that, because it's really easy for the day to get away from you. And something can just come up or somebody will call or something, and then you just lose time responding immediately to things. So I really like the idea that, there's a certain cutoff time and you can't book anything for the next day. We're not doing a lot of emergencies. I'm not taking the type of law like in criminal law or something where emergencies may come up. So I think getting control of your time is really key, because that was like the first thing that I thought of when I looked at Law Subscribed is, how does he do all of this stuff? I don't know how you do all of it. I still don't. You're still a hero on that one, but I have a little
Practice.
bit better insight, I think, maybe.
practice. And I'm not
So,
perfect, but it definitely helps to just put everything on your calendar and just,
mhm.
stick to it the best that you can. And it makes your life easier. Give yourself that 15-30 minutes at the end of every day to plan out your next day. And even if you write it down, it doesn't have to be digital. But if you're leveraging these tech tools, it should be digital. But even just writing it down sometimes does help.
You mentioned when you were talking, you mentioned a little bit about AI. So I just wanted to kind of ask you about that because I have heard you say, and others as well, that AI is really helpful in terms of time is again, because you can do the first draft and then you can kind of go over things and, maybe come up with some pieces you can use as templates for other things. What other kinds of, well, first of all, I guess in terms of AI, I mean, are there any suggested programs with it? ChatGPT makes me a little nervous. Too many horror stories. So, and now there are lots of them that are geared to legal. There's one I think it's Storybook, I think, and a couple of others. Do you have any thoughts about those?
Yeah, and I think it's important that you frame AI in the right way when you're thinking about using it. And it is never supposed to be a complete source of truth. You want to narrow the source of truth. And I've learned, I even have an article in the ABA GP Solo magazine that really it shares all my knowledge and wisdom about this. But what that's called in the AI world, which I learned after I wrote the article, unfortunately, is called retrieval augmented generation. And so it's like, here's you upload a document and you're like, and then you query about that document. Summarize this for create an executive summary. Or, what are the franchisor responsibilities? Make it in a chart. What are the franchisee responsibilities? Make it in a chart. And these legal AI tools that are designed for law, they all have footnotes on them so that like in the summary, you could click on it and it'll bring you to that part of the document where it summarized it from so you could check it against it, right? So Paxton, Paxton, and at time of recording, their episode isn't live, but their episode's going to be live by the time listeners hear this. They are a fantastic general legal AI assistant tool. And they've also just announced new pricing on their website. So you have to check that out. They were in free beta for like the last 6 months. So it's been fun. But I'm going to have to start paying to use that tool. But if you could only use one tool, I would use Paxton because they also have trained their models on all state and federal laws. And just doing that, even though they were designed for a different purpose originally for like SEC attorneys and like regulators in that space, because they trained their models on all state and federal laws, it just became really good at answering legal questions. And you could restrict your queries for them to only look at Illinois law or only look at even administrative Illinois law or whatever your jurisdiction is. And it will give you answers like upload a document. Does this document comply with Illinois law? Are there any provisions in this document that are in violation of any Illinois law? And you could ask it that. And then you just interact with it like you interact with an associate or a paralegal. Like I communicate with these AI tools just like I would communicate with another person, which is why I think the more experienced lawyers who have been practicing law for a long time and are stuck in their ways, once they start using these tools, they're going to realize, oh, I'm just communicating with this just like I would communicate with a person. And
Right.
and guess what? People make mistakes too. So so don't worry about these tools making mistakes. They may make mistakes, but far fewer mistakes in my experience than people make. As long as you don't go to them for a source of truth that they're not designed for, which is what some of these lawyers have been using ChatGPT for. It's not a legal research tool. So don't use it like that, and then you'll have no problems.
Okay. Great. That. Thank you. I'll be looking it up as soon as we finish our podcast. I'll be looking that up.
Yes,
Because I
and
think
I think they said there's a 2-week free trial, so anyone
okay.
should be able to play around with it regardless of the new prices.
Okay. I'll definitely do that. I mean, I think for the subscription model to work, the technology is critical because otherwise you'd never be able to get it all done. And certainly you wouldn't be able to get it all done as a solo. So I think that gives me a level of comfort in terms of going this way and in this direction. And, I guess I'm starting to work on the whole tech stack, learning so many things, learning the whole tech stack. And I did look at a couple of the case management software, but what I'm seeing is that they tend to be built on the billable hour. So I'm not sure kind of how that's going to work, or do I have to tweak them, or if there are any that are not built on a billable hour model that might be more useful in terms of subscriptions.
Yeah, so here's That is an incredibly astute observation. It's the same conclusion I came to 4 or 5 years ago when I first started to do my research on the subscription model and how I was going to make it practically work. There are two legal tech platforms that are built to power subscription model law firms, and that is Fidu Legal. Kim Bennett was my first guest on the podcast. Later today, there's going to be a panel I'm moderating that she's on for the Chicago Bar Association. And that is literally like she was one of the early and still longest running subscription attorneys. And so she co-founded this legal tech company that helps lawyers launch subscriptions and flat and alternative pricing. It's $100 a month for everything. And at least for me, when I was starting out, that just wasn't an option. And so their payment platform that they partner with, formerly known as Gravity Legal, now known as Confido Legal, you can, in their platform, for free, I mean, not for free, but they take a percentage. So they take the percentage on payments, 2.95% on credit cards and debit cards, and around 1% for ACH transactions. You could just power subscription billing in there for free and use it for IOLTA and client trust fund accounts. So which is how I use it. I just use it for client trust fund accounts because I'm using Stripe integrated with SweetDash. Now, SweetDash is only costing me, though I got it for a deal, and as long as I stay subscribed, I keep it at this price. It's a little more, but it's still less than $200 a year. It's $135 a year for me. A year.
Wow.
Now, is it as nice and does it do all the things that I like that are built for law? No, but it's HIPAA compliant if you turn on the right options. And so that's good enough for me for a confidential client communication platform. And I integrate it with Stripe and it powers my subscriptions and it works great. And the thing is I only have maybe like 50% buy-in from my clients to using a client portal. So there's the question of, do you even want to use a client portal when you're just getting started? Is that necessary? Maybe you could use the app Signal, which is a encrypted two-way communication platform. It's just like another app you download to text with your clients, but it has encryption on both ends. And I haven't actually read the terms of use and all that stuff, but from what I understand, Signal is a secure way to communicate with anyone in an encrypted way. This is what like the people trading crypto that are doing nefarious things use. Like they use this app, right? So maybe that means the government has access to it, but the government has access to everything.
Sure.
So, we just have to make best efforts to maintain those confidential communications. So maybe you just use an app like Signal and you use Confido Legal to power your subscriptions. And in a previous interview I just recently had with somebody in your situation, Michelle, I had this realization was maybe it would be even better to just sign up the subscribers on a platform like Confido Legal and keep it separate from your practice management platform or your client portal platform, because it will lower the switching costs in the future if you decide you don't like this platform and you want to switch. You don't have to get all your clients to go sign up on the new platform because you're still getting the recurring payments every month through your singular, separate payment platform system. So there's a benefit to that. So I really think that even just bootstrapping with Confido Legal is a really easy way to do it. And Stripe takes 2.9%, not 2.95%, but it also takes 30 cents per transaction. And there is a certain tipping point, but unlike Stripe, Confido Legal can do the trust fund payment system. So they take money out of the operating account to pay that 2.95% when you're putting money going directly into your client trust fund account. And Stripe doesn't do that unless you know how to code. So Confido Legal, not a sponsor, but they're really just the best solution to bootstrap a subscription law firm and have a payment processor and worry about the platform stuff second. And then that way, if you do really like My Case or Practice Panther or Smokeball or Clio or one of these other platforms that you're demoing, if you like their interface, well, you're just not going to accept client payments through those platforms, and that's fine. Although they're all too expensive for what we're trying to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, they are. They are a little pricey. A few years in, I might not think the same, but right now, trying to keep everything as low as possible so I can really get started. So I have a whole lot of things to look up when we finish working on this podcast. Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate it. I really do. I'm laughing, but I really do, because then that I want to get this started on the right way and in a way that's kind of economical. Because to our other discussion, one of the issues with people starting their own firms straight out of law school is I don't have the money for that. Your student loans are crushing you and all kinds of things may be happening. And you're thinking, I can't afford it. But you, if you look at what's possible, what's necessary and what's nice, but not necessary, it doesn't turn out to be that expensive. And I think that's important to note. So any place where they have a 2-week free trial or they have, whatever, or trade off of the percentage that's taken is worth it because you don't have to set up a law firm in the way that we look at it with a big office and 5 paralegals and all that. You don't need all of that anymore. So
Yeah.
that's really a good, we're in a good place. It's a good time.
Yeah. And I think another important part of that, because it's not a technology subscription, but I pay every month for my malpractice insurance. And when I got started, I was doing real estate. And so I thought I really needed like a million policy, 1 million per incident, 1 million in aggregate. And I probably didn't. I probably could have saved 50% on my monthly insurance costs if I started at 500, or 500, 1 million for my first year and then increased it in the second year at the renewal phase. Because you're not going to have a lot of clients in your first year. I mean, maybe you do. That would be great. I mean, I did not have my second year was where things really took off for me. So, because that flywheel and that, word of mouth and all that
Right.
starts to
Mhm.
go. But I probably could have saved some money on my malpractice insurance, which is still my largest monthly expense. And so thinking about that, I would just think monthly malpractice insurance, the Confido legal percentage off what the clients take, and then like one really good AI tool like Paxton, which I think is I think it's $100 a month
Mhm.
now is what they're charging. And like if you could just have those 3 tools, because you can analyze documents, and while it's not perfect, it's not a replacement for some of these other platforms out there. You can draft some documents, some
Mhm.
legal documents from scratch when it's trained on all laws and it's trained on millions of sample documents. I mean, it's still going to be a really good starting point, right? So like those 3 tools, probably all you need to get started. And, could you use some of the free AI versions out there? Yes, but they're not going to be nearly as good for what a lawyer needs. But if you just had to pick 3 tools, I would start with those 3 tools just to get started. There's obviously a lot more and like way more like of a rabbit hole that we could go down with the technology to use. But those like how to get payments, how to
Mhm.
do the actual work, right? And like making sure you're compliant with if certain jurisdictions require malpractice insurance, certain ones don't. But like I partner with certain platforms like Hello Prenup, and in
Mhm.
order for them to list me as one of their panel attorneys that they recommend to their customers, I have to have a minimum threshold of insurance requirements for that. And you have to look at those types of things. Like, do I need not just the minimum insurance for my jurisdiction or for what's recommended, but also will I be foreclosing other partnership opportunities by not having sufficient insurance coverage? But in your first year, probably less of a concern because those opportunities more arise after you have a history of practicing and building your brand. So it doesn't have to be expensive to get started. And, really at the end of the day, I mean, you can. I think there are some platforms out there like 650, which is one of the sponsors of this podcast, where if your client needs that automation for that type of document that they happen to offer,
Mhm.
they let you pay for just a one-off, one-time use automation and just make your client pay for that, and it's a flat fee, right? And you could, I mean, I think in certain jurisdictions you could even ethically mark it up because you're still providing the guidance through that automation. So even if they charge 250, you could charge 300 or 500 to go through that automation, and you just pay for that fee out of the fee that they're paying you. So there's different ways to structure that, because we didn't even get into how to structure the flat fee or the subscription and flat fee pricing. But longtime listeners know that I basically use the Costco model, which is the $20 a month gets you access and some advice. But then that's what opens up all these below market flat fee rates and below market subscription add-ons and all these other things, right? So like as far as pricing is concerned, listeners can go back and listen to, I think it's episode 52 of the podcast. Yeah, so episode 52 of the podcast is a previous CLE that I gave on the model where I talk more about thinking about how to structure your prices. And I have some time, Michelle. Do you have some time? Because I'm happy to talk about that if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I want to look at like what you're doing, right? Specifically. So you've got special education and education law and estate planning, right? So like, how do you structure that? And I think this is really important for listeners because I always say in my CLE or whenever I'm teaching some version of this to a group of attorneys is that like kind of like don't do it the way I'm doing it because I'm so broad, right? I'm general transactional and my brand is very broad as a result of that. And it's harder to sell. It just is. It's harder to sell. It's harder to explain what you do. And having a niche practice is easier, not only as far as marketing is concerned, but it's also easier as far as pricing your services. So if you're just doing education law or you're just doing estate planning, though, I also feel like niching down too much into just one practice area makes it harder to do subscriptions, depending on the practice area, right? So, like, if I'm just doing estate planning, like I talked to one attorney in Australia that they just have an annual maintenance plan so that once a year, you pay, I think he said you pay $100, and once a year we'll sit down and we'll go over your estate plan and see if we need to make any changes. And that's the benefit of that. So it's just an annual subscription. And it is kind of hard to price certain things when you just have like the one practice area. But if you're able to provide more offerings, even with what I just said about niching down is easier to price. So you're able to offer at least two different offerings, right? You've got education and then you've got the estate planning thing. So by building in a subscription like a monthly price, and I prefer monthly price over annual price because with a monthly price, every single month you have to be providing value to your client, and every time they get that charge, they think, "Oh yeah, I have a lawyer. I'm going to talk to my lawyer," and that helps keep the relationship going, right? So that's seeing that monthly recurring charge, and there are better ways to do it than them just seeing the charge, like send out an email once a month to all your subscribers, or if you have different tiered levels, right? But even if you just do an entry level price like me, now when you have, depending on how you set it up, you could do a subscription add-on, which is what I do for estate planning clients, or you could just bundle it as to one packaged price where it's like when you have estate planning related questions, that's part of what you're paying for every month anyway. So contact me with those questions, right? So that's one of the ways that you could do that, because I have to imagine they're going to be having education related questions, yet something might come up like there's a new asset or something happens with their finances or they get a new job. So there's a new 401k and who do we name as and you're going to have to work with their financial advisors with this too, because we can't give financial advice, but as estate planning attorneys, but there are ways to price that. I like to take the membership model approach, like the Costco model, and then unbundle the rest of my services. And then if somebody has more ongoing needs, I could rebundle those services back together at a higher monthly subscription price. So I've had a client recently who has signed up at $20 a month. They've had a 5-page contract here. They've had a 12-page contract there. And over the last 2 years that they've been a client of mine, it's ebbed and flowed with how often they have these one-off contracts that they want me to help them with. And I charge $50 a page. And they've decided that this year we were able to agree on a monthly price that they think that that whenever one of these contracts come in, I'm just going to handle it, and we stop counting pages. And I like it because it's a higher month. Like, I mean, we talk about going from $20 a month to $500 a month, which is pretty substantial. But they were paying me, $600 to $1,000 sometimes, and like $100 to $200 other times for the shorter contracts or longer contracts. So we kind of came to this number. And even if they end up sending me more contracts that are longer, well, since it is month to month, I could touch base with this client and say, hey, this wasn't really exactly what we had in mind. Maybe it makes sense to up it to $600 a month or $700 a month because of all these contracts that you're sending me. And I think that in light of the value I'm going to be providing this client, that's going to be great. And maybe they send me fewer contracts, but longer contracts, and then we priced it right. So don't be afraid to experiment with your pricing, and don't be afraid to have those conversations with your client of, I think we need to reevaluate pricing. And the same thing should be true of going down. Hey, you're paying me $500 a month. Last year, you didn't really use it that much. Maybe $350 a month makes more sense in light of the contracts that you sent me last year. And so I think it's important to be fair both ways, but rebundling back in some of these other services that you've unbundled can help you sell these larger subscriptions without having to do all the counting pages or however you've decided to do your flat fee pricing if you decide to go subscription plus flat fee. I would need to learn more about exactly the types of legal services you're offering to make recommendations on how you could just do if you just want to do pure subscription. But depending on the markets that you're trying to serve, like I'm trying to serve people who've never hired lawyers before, they like having the unbundled pricing. So, until they don't, until they realize paying per page, until they realize paying per page is a lot. So I,
Right.
I like doing the unbundled pricing. So do you have any questions around any of that?
I mean, as I'm listening, it makes a lot of sense to me because, first of all, I think people like the idea that they have a lawyer, that there's somebody they can call, there's somebody they can contact. They're not sort of out there by themselves. And people don't always know when or how a lawyer can be helpful. So I think that's a great entry point. In terms of education, it's a whole process. If you want your child, if you think there's some concern and you want the child evaluated and you want them to get the services, there's a whole process for that I can see unbundling and putting different kinds of packages together. And on the other side, if your child is in some special education program, you think it's inappropriate, something happened at school, you know, there are ways that I think I can break it down and create flat fees for different portions of work, whether you want me to do it or whether you want me to give you the assistance so that you can go in and address the people in the meeting. Because most special ed, it's in the school building, it's in the school district, doesn't get to court until kind of due process, which is a bit later in the process.
Mhm.
So I can see that unbundled with flat fees would make a lot of sense and would be accessible. And I'm just, as you were talking, I'm trying to think through how I would create packages in that field in special education. I think with estate planning, I mean, the annual subscription makes sense because you really should check your plan once a year if things happen. So that makes sense to me. But the other place where, so this is a really niche. So I don't know if you're going to keep it in there or not, but I'll tell you. Um, or I really don't want to focus on estate plans for people who are in, I guess you would call them non-traditional religions. Where I live, there are a lot of people who are Wiccan. There are people who follow whatever religion they follow, and maybe their whole family is not involved in that. So a part of estate planning is really what what happens to their things, what happens to their religious articles, what happens to, and they may be involved in a group in their religion. So do they have any rights to anything? So the estate planning is a little bit more nuanced because you have to kind of plan for those things. And the worst, and I've seen these situations where the person's birth family just throws everything out and the person's sort of religious family is left and there's nothing. And it's a difficult situation because if you don't believe in it, of course, you don't value it. But the person who passed did believe in it and they did value it. And so, something well should happen. But
Yeah, that is a great niche. If
I
like,
think, yeah,
yeah,
that's kind of where it is.
if the clients, if
Um,
you've got the clients, that is so specific that they're like, well, then this is the estate planning lawyer for me.
yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And to go and I vaguely recall because I was once asked if I could do it and I looked into it and I decided I couldn't because it was too complicated. I couldn't personally find a way to streamline it and make it efficient because of the nature of my practice. But there's like a type of plan for special ed students, right? Like what is that called again? I can't remember what it's called.
Right. The special needs trust.
Special
Right.
well, there's special needs trust, and then there's like I think there's some kind of plan that like in the school, like you have like a contract, like as part of this plan. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I have to imagine that a valuable subscription would be once a month, we're gonna make sure the school is complying with the plan, right? So
Right.
like, boom, there's a subscription add-on. So if you wanted to do the true like unbundled membership model like me, where it's $20 a month, you get to schedule calls with me, and then you get access to all this flat fee pricing. One of your subscription add-ons could be monthly check-ins on that XYZ plan or whatever it's called, right? There you go. And
I think
like
you're
there,
talking about an IEP, the individualized educational plan, right, for that particular
yes,
child to ensure that they get all the services that they're entitled to. Yeah, I think that's critical because it doesn't help to have a plan that's not being implemented. That's not helping that child at all.
right. And I don't know how you like, we'd have to do a deep dive on like what's the right monthly price for that type of a thing.
Mhm.
And how much can you automate, right? So can you like have like in an eventual system that you have on the back end, can you like automate an email out to the administrative liaison that's like, hey, here's this Google form or Jot form or some form, like to make sure these things are being done. And so like how much of that can you even automate, let alone the value that you're providing? And just by looking at that report, that comes back from the school. So like an automated form goes out to the school, to your client, they fill it out, you see, okay, like my client's saying this, but the school's saying that. Like this is something I need to look into now, right? So like finding a way to do partial automation and then
Hmm.
provide that added value, that's got to be worth, I don't know, maybe another $200 a month or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Depending on.
that. I like that one. That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I think that's the beauty of subscription is that you can look at what you do with law in a different way,
Mhm.
and it makes there are so many open possibilities. Because I wouldn't have thought of this area in terms of the estate planning without thinking about the subscription model. Because it's important to be able to kind of tailor things and then to stay on top of them. So I will be picking up on that idea you just gave me. Thank you, Matthew.
You're welcome.
And
I'm happy to have you on
start
the show and
developing.
help inspire you.
I can't wait to be in your class. Yeah, that would really. There are lots of things to be done, and I'm looking forward to being able to really work in this area.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with that, we'll bring it to the reason I know everybody stays to the end of the episode, which is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
I knew this was coming because I've listened before. I would say yes, a hot dog is a sandwich because even if it's just one piece of bread, it's still kind of encased in the bread when you put it into the bun. So I'd say that's a sandwich because there's two sides to the bread, even if there aren't two pieces of bread.
All right. We'll accept it.
Okay.
Thank you for giving the explanation there too. A lot of people, they just say yes or no, and then I have to prod them for the explanation. But you gave it. That's good. Well thought out. And then with that, if people wanted to find your law firm or connect with you, what's the best places for them to do that?
The best place is the website, which is learninglegacieslaw.com. And you can reach me at Michelle at learninglegacieslaw.com.
All
It's
right.
my
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. That's a pleasure. Take care.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.